All right. Hello, everyone. This is Climate Lounge, a vibe shift for your day. Thank you so much for joining live, and then also joining on Wampum.codes as a podcast. We have a special guest today, and I will let our first guest introduce himself.
Hi everyone, my name is Madebo Fatunde. I am a writer and I guess what some might call a futurist, but I just kind of call a thing. Um, and a friend of Amelia's, and really excited to be here and share some ravings with you. So thank you for having me.
Oh, thank you so much for coming. And we have another person on here, which is Eamon. He's not sharing his camera, but playing some music. So maybe you want to play something for us and say hi, Eamon.
What up, yo? How's it going? No, I'm trying to share the camera, but it keeps saying that it loses touch with, like, can you see this?
No. Oh wait, yes, I see you. Hello. But then you're frozen. But see, everyone got a quick glimpse of what you're about.
Yep.
That's good. That's who you are. That's what you're about. Lately, Eamon always has a guitar strapped to him at all times, even as he's doing other tasks, and he'll be like, one arm at a timing it. So he's just always with the guitar. So thanks for bringing your guitar. Not that you had a choice. I think you're connected. So that's awesome. We like to have some vibe shifts, for your day. So thanks for that.
An instrument is like a deep vibe shift. I've been
Yeah.
noticing, especially since like I'm working on a treatment with the musician main character, and I'm like I've forgotten what it feels like to have that relationship with an object.
Yeah.
It becomes like an appendage,
Yeah.
Yeah, it's pretty good.
So how come we can hear your music and also still talk? We already sound check. I'll deal with this later.
Must be hosting privileges.
Yeah, something like that.
I just have it turned down really low on Ableton. Got like my little soft pads. Trying to be vibey, vibe shift for your day. Me and Madebo right before the stream we're talking about what kind of streams we like to watch. I haven't found my stream that I love to watch, which is why I thought I'd try to create my own. That's what I do when I like an idea of something, but haven't found I'm not like yet a fan. I try to make it myself and be like, what would I like to do? What would I like to vibe with and listen to? And this past week, we've been talking a little bit about Madebo coming on, and he has some quotes from a book that we're going to be sharing on today's vibe shift. I read some of them to Eamon last night. We read some of them at a party that we were at on Sunday, or was it Saturday? I don't remember now. Saturday, I think. And we were all kind of talking about what they meant. Would you like to talk to us a little bit about what this book is, maybe before we dive into some of the quotes? Or should we just look at the text and then talk more about where it comes from? Oh, can't hear you. Wait, did I mute you?
No. I muted myself.
Okay.
But I'm happy to give some context. So this book is called Prophetic Culture by Federico Campagna. He's sort of an anarchist philosopher, a scholar of religion as well, and I'll try to give his argument a good showing here. But I think the crux of the argument um, is that the the meta narrative of Western civilization has reached the end of its usefulness. We are living in an accelerated and somewhat apocalyptic age, and that human history has actually like rather thick tolerances for this. And so there are forms of culture, right? Campagna sort of argues, right, that there are civilizations that are intermediary civilizations. So he calls them adolescent civilizations. And these are the ones these are post-apocalyptic civilizations. So if you think about, Europe in the Middle Ages, had lost, so much of the information from antiquity and was just sort of like roaming around, finding little scraps of it and trying to rebuild, right, the idea of a civilization out of it. And so Campagna's argument, to a large degree, is one: this way of worlding is near its end, or at least it's beneficial to us, perhaps, to live as though this civilization has already collapsed. And he argues that for cultural workers, the clearest target audience is that adolescent culture that's going to come after us, right? So, like, what do we have to offer the civilizations that will survive us, and that will, that will have to build a new method of worlding, which is what he calls, all of the, all of the small acts and the understandings that it takes for us to, hold a civilization consistent, between ourselves. And so he says that essentially the greatest gift, right, the highest work, for somebody in this civilization is to be working for those people on the other side of the collapse of our civilization. Um, and it's something I found really compelling. And he describes that offering as what he calls a tetrapharmakos, which is a sort of fourfold medicine. And this is something he describes through archetypes, right? So he takes the archetype of the metaphysician. So if you think of something that makes hard distinctions, something that wants to study things sort of in isolation, but you think very much about sort of um, uh, like scientific realism of Western society, rationalism, etc. So that's sort of like the metaphysician. Then there's the shaman that sort of walks between worlds, right? For the benefit of both, but the idea that they can sort of like cross this die off of sort of more mystical different time of occult, and other types of knowledges, and then there's the mystic who is more devoted to this other side than to this world, right? And then what he calls the prophet, that archetype is sort of a substrate that sort of binds and holds the other three, and would allow one to move through sort of all of those different modes of worlding, um, as like rather fluidly, right? And that this this final archetype, that of the prophet, and what he calls prophetic culture, is you know something that is both mutable and stable enough to perhaps begin building another culture on, or at least to begin speaking into it. And so he goes through histories of different religious traditions and their experiences of their descriptions of prophecy and things like that, as well as different intellectual systems, right? And thinking about like, well, what does it mean? What are the adolescent cultures within these, and how do people survive the end of a paradigm?
A couple of questions came out. Hi, Martha. Martha's just joined our train. This is Martha
Hello.
Bearskin. Do you want to introduce yourself really quickly?
Hi, everyone. I'm Martha Bearskin. I am a computer scientist. I work at the USGS and I work in water data.
Yeah, well, we're talking a lot about this amazing book. Would you say again the title, Madebo, for people maybe just joining?
Yeah, so it's by Federico Campagna. That's spelled it like in Italian, so Campagna. And the book title is Prophetic Culture. The subtitle is Recreation for Adolescents.
Amazing. So I had a couple questions, that came up as you were discussing it. My first thought was, I can't think almost of any science fiction book that I've read, maybe ever, that doesn't contain the archetypes that you were describing, right? Like, it seems like such a
Mhm.
hallmark of science fiction. Is it unique to science fiction, or would you say that those types of archetypes that he describes move throughout all fiction? But for me, it really resonated specifically around science fiction. And then the second question I had was, Eamon asked this to me last night, where he said, "What is worlding?" And I said, "Oh, that's world building." But then I thought maybe that's a very reductive way of saying it. So I would love to know what you define worlding to be, and then also, what do you think about it in relationship to science fiction?
Thank you. This is perfect. I've got another 20-minute rant on the way. No, so to your first question, how is it related to science fiction? I think it is. I think the archetypes probably exist beyond science fiction, certainly. So especially fantasy. I think also, like, just if you look at religious traditions, right? There are, you know, reading the Sufi mystics, right? Is like all tied up in that world. And I think for some of the other knowledge systems, so for instance the shaman, there's not as much that's recorded, right? Because like many of these are coming from oral traditions. I think more of it is sort of being surfaced now, but quite often you get sort of this regurgitated Western version of them. But I do see these archetypes across many different narrative traditions, and especially esoteric traditions. I would say also just any, I see them in a lot of stand-up comedy, right? Like in ways like any art form where your vocal performance or your um, you know or your arc is like trying to pierce a certain thing. If you think about the traditional hero's journey, right? You dip into that underworld, right? And these archetypes are all a different stance kind of towards that underworld. Um, and so you have to dig to find it, sometimes in secular society, but I think it's always there on some level. To your second question, what is worlding? I think it's complicated. So for me, to me, this is the question that brought me to this book, really. So I've been, working, in, both in creative spaces and corporate spaces and sort of non-aligned spaces, which I think would automatically align them more with creativity in some ways. But as, helping people like through world building exercises, right? And I think there's a form of deep cruelty associated with that when you sort of create this space for people to dream into, and then you deposit them back into a world in which that's, not possible. And so I think one form of worlding is skepticism, right? Is sort of the load bearing, structures of scientific rationalism of understanding. And so there's a worlding going on there that says that is too far beyond the pale, that has not, served these certain proofs, that has not, that's not within the realm of discussion. If we think about capitalist realism, right, that is also a form of worlding to say, uh, you know, to say that Frederick Jameson is often quoted as saying, that it's easier to imagine the end of the world than the end of capitalism. And I think that's probably partially true. But what is even harder to my mind than imagining beyond capitalism is imagining the transition from capitalism to something else. And I think every form of worlding is the self-interested aspect of society. It is the ways in which we perpetuate, right, the systems that we live within, right, and it is, I would say it's like the cornerstone of our complicity in a lot of ways, right? But there are also sort of there are not counter-revolutionary, but like revolutionary forms of worlding, right? Ones that move us beyond sort of what this world has allowed us, the horizons that this world has held for us, right? And so you could imagine forms of worlding. One, like Campagna is suggesting, that say this I am already dead to this civilization, right? And I am sort of in this weird liminal space from which everything is a little bit ridiculous and everything is a little bit sort of corrosive and unholy, right? And it's just like, and from that perspective, perhaps it is possible to begin the new worlding. And I think that's his argument, is sort of prophetic culture is that thing that is a step outside of all these different modes of worlding and gesturing towards a new one.
Thank you for that description. I really appreciate that. The other day I was talking about science fiction with my class, because I teach a class called AI plus art science fiction. So we look at how AI affects fiction and art and science. And I asked them to think of a science fiction story that had AI in it. And so that we all like did this Menti, and we're like popping up word cloud on screen, and all these different sci-fi books, as many as they could think of, like just every single one you've ever read or even heard of, right? That it has AI in it. And then I said, how many of these is AI good? Just like in any way you would describe good, or like ascribe good values, like did good, is good, made good, helped, and only one girl had an answer for her book. She said that in this book, the AI was bad, and then they convinced it to become good by the end. Like a group of teenagers, actually, thinking of teenagers,
Mm.
convinced the AI to actually try to help kids rather than harm them. And it was about, I think the AI was bullying the children, and then the children got together and taught it what the values that they had was, and it became something that would like help them. And I thought, well, it's kind of odd that we cannot imagine a future where AI is good, and yet we're building it. No one's saying stop, no one's slowing down, no one's, like the wheels are moving, and we are on this very high speed chase to the next AI innovation. And yet it's odd that there's only one book, and even in that book the AI was bad, had to be like convinced to be good. So I thought that was very odd. If we can't imagine, even in our most spectacular viewpoints, that it could be good, why are we making it all? So I don't know, we all kind of talked about that, like how come we can't imagine a world in which it would be helpful? Or some students felt like maybe that's not the role of science fiction. Science fiction is always a cautionary tale. What do you think
Mm.
about
So a few things. The first is a reaction that's just a recognition, really, of an argument that Louis Chude-Soke made. He's a literature professor at, I think, Boston University at this point. But uh, he looks to AI as this new paroxysm of the argument about what's admissible as human and what is it like okay to give rights to, right? That starts with humans, like you know, especially with our legal code base. But so he looks at this in some ways prophetic idea of the singularity as as sort of a third reconstruction, right? Like that we are fighting between we're fighting between these two constitutions, right? One of which is like trying to be imposed on the other one post hoc, right? Which is like, oh no, like actually people deserve rights. Whereas the first one's just like, no, really, we're ready to do the England thing for ourselves, right? And then now we're asking ourselves the questions, right? Like if we are able to make these other sentiences, right? How do we how do we justify enslaving them? Right?
Yeah, absolutely.
But one reason, right, that the AI is always bad is that we imagine the AI is always oppressed, and like, and like bent to our will, right, in some way. We also imagine it as sentient, somewhat like we will be, or something somewhat like we are, which may never be true, but we can't tell that yet. So I have that reaction. If I were to think um, about what Campagna might say, is that there is the dominance of there's the dominance of the metaphysician, right? So if you would take like a shamanistic view towards AI, then perhaps AI are the beings, right, native to the digital plane that we have opened doors to recently, right? In part by uh, in part by bending rocks and making them think, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think there's another perspective on this, which is that these are ancestral, right, relations, right? The uh, you know the cobalt, right, inside these machines, the copper, the coltan, right, are there are people with with ancestral relations to them, which I don't know exactly what to do with, frankly, with that shamanic perspective so much. And then there's, I think the singularity probably moves this and nudges this into the mystical realm of like, well, that this is how we transcend flesh, right? And you know, I think perhaps for him, a for him a prophetic take on the AI thing is just like, well, um, it's very complex. I want to say that there's a way to hold all three perspectives, right? And that there are there's that which is there's that which is now somehow due, right, to them. There is that which is somehow already dead to them, right? There's not much semantic, like, we are freaking out because these machines are getting close to, I guess, semantic uh, operations, right?
Right.
And at the end of the day, these things mean nothing to them, right? And we are trying to find ways to make them meaningful, right? And so there's that sort of like wry comedic stance of just like, "All right, whatever." And then I think there's also that shamanic view of like, okay, well, we are going to be in interrelation with these, you know, from now on. And so what I think the question he might ask is like, what is the relation of a being of somebody who discovers AI, right? After the end of our civilization, right? Somebody who discovers this tool, what are the uses they might put it to? What are the uses they might require of it, right? And how, absent all of these relations that we've set up around it, might it be freed, right, for a different use? Um, but that's my first take on that. So we can keep revising.
Yeah, no, that's really great. I had a journalist call me a couple of days ago to ask about AI and hands, right? Like, so for
Mm.
those who aren't familiar, AI is notoriously horrible at drawing hands. We can try it right now. We like to kind of mess around with Midjourney here. Do you want to try to give it a prompt to see what kind of hands it comes up with? Let me try to share here. Um, let's see, share my screen. Let's see, here we go. Anyone have a good prompt for hands?
For sketching hands.
For sketching hands.
Dang.
Usually it's just kind of like holding. Like I'll use the word holding, or yeah, or we could even say shaking hands. Like maybe it could be. Let's get some descriptor words here. So like
What is it holding?
yeah, what is it holding? So we could be like two women holding. What should they be holding?
Holding a snow globe.
And inside the snow globe is, or a theme. Maybe we'll say street photography.
I like that.
Street photography 90s. Okay, let's see what happens. Oh, okay. I didn't even do it in the right prompt. Typical Amelia. So the reporter called to say, what is up with this hands? Like, why can't AI draw hands that looks normal? And you know, we talked a lot about you know, Lynette and very early image recognition algorithms that were used to devise characters that were written by humans rather than in ASCII characters, right? And we talked about the way in which it's reconstructing images based on images rather than looking at what is embodied by humans. That oftentimes if there's a painting of me like this, you know, my hand doesn't really look like this, but it looks like that in the painting because it's like holding on to something. Or if it's like this, it looks like a hand looks like this, but hands really are these separate articulations. So let's see what let's see what we got here. That's kind of terrifying. Do you see the hands?
Moving fingers, but yeah, nothing that can be a
like
whole hand.
right, 1 2 3 4 5 6 7 on one hand, 1 2 3 4 5 6 on the other. This one is just like hands of one. I don't know, that one is interesting, kind of like a Muppet hands, and there's just one hand. That was kind of like the most realistic one. Yeah.
You ask it to draw a single human hand.
Oh yeah, let's try that. a single human hand. It probably will do that. Probably will be able to do that. It's usually when it's like holding, like I have this image of it. I said, I seeded it with my own image. And then I said, you know, a woman holding a border collie. And it just made it so the border collie was like melting over my arm. Like it was amazing.
Oh, that's crazy.
But I started thinking about hands because Eamon was like, well, are hands important in art? And when you're in art school, you know, you're taught to draw your hand. Obviously, MC Escher has a million studies of the hand, drawing the hand. Leonardo da Vinci has incredible studies of drawing the hand. It's kind of considered this thing that if you can, like, you're not an artist if you can't try to draw a hand. Obviously, that's not true, but it's something that we're encouraged to do, like drawing the tool that we use to make art, drawing this expression of what it is to have art. And then I said, well, as this is rendering, maybe I will stop sharing and share another window here. So I started kind of deep diving into, I'll show you a tab here, hands in art. So I started just looking at every type of article I could find about hands. And this one is about the earliest images of these hands are about 9,500 years old. And the oldest images of these hands are 14,000 years old. This is an image of hands that is the absolutely oldest image that a Homo sapien has ever made that we have found in Indonesia, 40,000 years old of a hand. And then it kind of goes through all these different ways in which hands are important. Obviously, we think of the Sistine Chapel, the most recognizable moment of Michelangelo's creation is the two hands. And I just started thinking, like, is this its hands, right? Or is this its expression of hands? Maybe that is what the hands of AI look like. I don't know. I'm just, I kind of got very obsessed with hands after this conversation with this reporter. So let's see what it came up with here. Oh man, that's terrifying, Amen. Actually, I don't think it's quite rendered yet. Okay, there it is. There's the full one.
Very
I don't like
Oh,
anything about it.
I don't like it.
I mean,
Curse,
that's one in the bottom
curse,
left kind of looks
curse.
like a heart.
It looks, oh my
It
God,
does
that's
look like a heart.
totally a
And then
hand is
one is definitely like a zombie hand.
100% a zombie hand. Also only 4 fingers again. Are any of them
Yeah.
correct? 1, 2,
No.
3, 4,
It's
5.
like stigmata.
It is like a stigmata, and
Yeah.
also has an extra finger on its pinky.
Can I get a copy of this one in the top left?
Of course. Happy. I can, and we can also you can do this thing where that's U1, right? So we can upscale it to give you a
Switch it
bigger
towards
version of it.
that.
Then we
I
can
like
also
that.
give you. You said the upper left one. Is that what you said?
Yeah, the upper left, the one with the deep stigmata.
Yeah. And then I'm gonna V1 it too, so we can see if it comes up with another version. So you can kind of like upscale it and then get another version. We'll just see. I'm happy to send it to you though. But yeah. Hands. So I was kind of like, I mean, I know from like a technological point of view why it can't make hands, but then I started thinking more from a philosophical point of view. What if this is its hands? You know, like what if, ooh, there it is with variations. It kind of got rid of the stigmata in this one, but now it has like more of a fate line for like palmistry, right? That's wild.
Fascinating.
We always like to play this game just because I don't know, it kind of we can talk and look at the same time, but what are some of your thoughts about hands? Oh, go for it, Martha.
Oh, I was just thinking, so since you were talking about like art and everybody has to learn how to draw hands and it's like notoriously the hardest thing to learn how to draw, I guess this is just like true for AI as well. It's the hardest thing to
What I
draw.
was thinking. I was like,
So it's
kinda
just like
young.
learning how to draw hands. And right now we're just keep giving it like an F. We're like, no, try.
Like, try again. Although it's an F in such a different way than an art student would be. I used to teach drawing and no student would ever give it an extra finger.
Right.
I mean, maybe.
But maybe. I
But
mean,
see,
I
but
saw
they can
some
do all
really
the detail, right? Like it can have all the wrinkles in the hands and all this like whatever, but it can't decide how many fingers to have.
Yeah.
It doesn't understand.
Or
So
what
it's
side
also
the nail
like
goes on. Right.
AI is just this like reflection of us because it's only what we can teach it. So we're also not very good at teaching it how to draw hands, clearly.
I think hands are also troublesome. Like they're just like all constantly moving. I think about like, people are always telling you don't get tattoos on your hands, they're gonna fade so fast. You do too much with your hands, you wash them too much. Like, and I
Mhm.
think this aspect of like, well, I mean, for one, I think it's interesting in that like, people make a lot of noise about the master's tools, and what if he just didn't have hands? Feet,
Yeah.
they, etc. But I think less tongue in cheek, just this idea that you know replication is hard, and like manual, like just like manual dexterity, right? Is like is really hard to replicate and really complicated, but also just like troublesome, right? Because
Yeah.
it's so varied, and then also like it is almost invisible to us, right? Like I think, what are the lengths one would have to go to today, like to get um, to get a still life or something of just somebody doing something with their hands. Like, outside of a phone, right? Like I think just like these scenes that we are going to depict are, sort of less varied over time in a way. And yeah, so um perhaps it's not like perhaps it's something like really dumb that's just like I just don't get a chance to snap a photo of hands very often. um but yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
or maybe hands are just like especially haunted.
I mean, these ones are especially haunted,
Right.
that's for sure. They're like ghostly white. They all look kind of like a corpse. Um, which is interesting because I wonder if it's pulling a lot from those early, all of those images that Leonardo da Vinci did of like the thousands of hands that he drew were all pencil on paper. And so I wonder if it's like taking that, the pencil on paper and then rendering it in realism. I don't know, like why is it so ghostly white? What is up with that? I don't know. It's weird.
Are there just a lot of images of like zombie hands coming out of the,
Yeah, like
ground or
game
something?
posters, and we discovered
Yeah.
that Madebo when we were trying to get it to generate images of water, that a lot of them were like ominous and scary and terrifying and horror, and even though we were just like water,
Right.
like that thing we all love and need to live in,
No.
is central to our planet, and like so that was interesting that a lot of it was like very scary, ominous imagery.
Yeah.
Apparently hands are in that camp too, hands and water,
Terrifying, terrifying.
Yeah. So that's interesting. So Campania has like a take on sort of the grotesque nature of I guess what he calls prophetic culture, but just like this, like you taking a step back from society in a way, like forces you to see all the deformations that it requires, and then also like puts you back in your body in a way. Um, and I haven't read Bakhtin in a while, but like the idea of the grotesque as that which reminds you that you're an animal in a way, and also like disfigures like modernism. Um, I think is also some part of his argument. Now, how Midjourney
Yeah.
it's that. I think maybe we've just made one too many movie posters.
Yeah, probably. Eamon has a famous quadrant. Eamon, do you want to talk about your quadrant? I don't know if I'm like busting you in the middle of whatever you're doing, but
I'll be right back. I need to adjust my shade.
yeah.
Yeah, the quadrant does involve the grotesque. It's funny. I have my little book about the grotesque right next to me right now. But the quadrant is a quadrant not so much of grotesqueness, but of, let's call it, paranormal phenomena, like X-Files. It's a way of classifying X-Files level phenomena. So it's like a classic political quadrant style, 2-axis diagram. One axis is between aliens and witches. That's the y-axis. And then the other axis is between ghosts and monsters. So the claim is that you can locate any paranormal, spooky type pop cultural or just folk cultural figure. You can locate them on this plane somewhere. And the kids love it. They have a great time with it.
I want to try to draw this do you have an image of it? Otherwise, I'm just going to draw it in Google Slides, see if I can get like a.
I mean, yeah, the image I have of it is just drawn in Google Slides. So,
Well, if you have one, yeah, share it.
If I can share it. I'm having a hard time with images on my phone, but maybe I can like send you the link because I have versions of it that students have actually tried to fill out.
Well, yeah, that's what I was going to say. Like, let's fill this out here. Let me
Yeah.
stop sharing this. I'm going to share another one. Let's see. We'll have our Chrome tab. I have this untitled presentation, right? This is my very bad quadrant right now. So say this again. So witches at the top here is bottom is witches, yeah?
Bottom is witches. Well, truly the bottom is earthly. The earthly is at the bottom.
Right. Oh, right. The earthly.
And what's the best way to share this with you?
Can you see it online? I'm just making it as we talk. Is it showing up?
Yeah, that's exactly what it looks like.
Yeah, I'm making it as you're saying it, Amy. What's the next one?
The top is the extraterrestrial.
All right. Okay.
On the left side of the x-axis is, I just have the word disembodied. And then on all the way to the right side of the x-axis, it says excessively embodied. There's an excess of bodily stuff.
I'm putting very embodied. Very embodied. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So then that's the that's it. And then if you want, I can show you what the students have made. It's pretty funny, actually.
Yeah. So I'll stop sharing, and then do you want to share or do you want to link it to me?
Yeah, why don't I link it to you?
Oh yeah, did you put it in the private chat? Oh yeah, put it in the private chat.
Anybody that has access to the link can view this. So let me I'm going to put in the chat the whole link to it, and then you can go and find where they've filled it out. Should go through soon.
I'll put it in for everybody. Do you want everyone to have access to your full?
Yeah, that's fine. There's no protected information.
Protected information. All right, here we go. We're putting it in the chat, everyone.
This is from the lecture I delivered called Hauntology. Shout to Mark Fisher.
Amazing.
That's Derrida.
Okay, Hauntology. Let us know if you want to stop at any specific slide. I'm going to get to your
So slide 11 is the thing that you just made.
Yeah. Okay.
Slide 16 is where the students had tried to fill in their ideas about what should go where.
Oh, I see. I like it. The Borg are very disembodied. I feel like they're I disagree with them. I feel like they're excessively embodied. They're stealing other people's bodies. The Chupacabra, though, I like that. I Twilight vampires. A mummy is dead in the middle. I didn't see that coming.
Me neither. I didn't anticipate that, but it kind of makes sense because the mummy is like in this case of having a body, but it's so desiccated that it almost doesn't have, it's like kind of a body, but it's like sort of, in transition. What I realized from trying to fill this out on my own, I'm just like slotting things and they're like statically placed on here. When I did it with the students, I mean, you see all these arrows and stuff. It's because a lot of these phenomena are actually disturbing because they're moving between these categories in ways that are like uncomfortable to us. So like a zombie is definitely embodied, but it's like moving away from its embodiedness as it progresses and sort of decays. So a lot of these are not as clear as I thought it was. I like how they put Satan in below witches. I'm not sure why they did that.
Well, because isn't like, I mean, it depends on what culture you're in, but some cultures think witches work for Satan. So maybe they're closer to the earth or they're further away from. I don't know. Yeah, that doesn't make sense.
Maybe they just figured he
Maybe
lived
because-
underground or something.
Yeah, maybe it's
Yeah.
like in terms of
He's
like
got to be the
below
furthest
ground.
from celestial he can be at this point.
Yeah, because he's been explicitly cast out from the kingdom of heaven. But then part of what is disturbing to me about like UFOs, like think about X-Files, the aliens and X-Files. It like they're disturbing not because they're not from Earth, but they're disturbing because they're not from the cosmology that has like a Western style great chain of being, right? They're totally alien from that. It's not that they're angels or something, it's that we don't have categories to understand them in this sort of God to Satan hierarchy that we have in our culture. And that's like troubling. You know, it would be less troubling if it was like a Buffy the Vampire Slayer style demon. At least that's my take on it.
Me and Eamon recently watched Nope, which means we're like way behind everyone else. Like it took us a million years to watch
I
it.
finally watched it.
You did? You did?
Yeah.
Have you seen it too, Madebo?
Yeah, I've seen it.
I mean, all my friends told me I should see it in the theaters with the loudest possible, like, you know, surround sound on the biggest possible screen. And I was like, tried, but no one wanted to go with me. And then because everyone was like, it's going to be too scary. It actually wasn't that scary. So I like feel like could have gone, but like most of my friends were like, it's going to be too scary. Yeah, and I don't know how we feel about spoilers on Climate Lounge, but I feel like that movie's been out so long. We can just talk about it, right? Like it's not like, I mean, it's like in Netflix or whatever at this point, right? Or HBO Max, right? But I liked it. What was that?
So I think I had to rent it.
Oh, you had to rent it. Okay. Well, I don't, you know, I feel like if spoilers abound after this moment, if you'd like to like mute us or something. But
Yeah.
I really liked the fact that it took aliens into being an animal and really looking at how like the way we would feel about that alien is the same way we'd feel about a lot of animals, where we don't super understand their motivations and we don't super understand like they could be as smart as us or 100 times smarter than us, but the type of smartness is just so different that we have to find a way to communicate with it, or in that case to be able to survive it, right? So I thought that was, I don't know, for me, I hadn't seen an alien film that was so similar to the way in which you'd interact with an animal, but maybe I just haven't seen enough films. What are your thoughts?
I felt like that too. I really thought it was a really different and interesting take on what that like first contact experience would be, because we always again like go with this very violent idea, and even though that alien was, I mean, kind of violent, but it was violent in the way that an animal is violent. I mean, you expect a lion to like try to eat you, you know. So
Right.
I really liked that idea, and also like, I don't know, and the sadness that like we already know how we treat animals, so we kind of already know how we would treat an animal that was even more like foreign to us.
Yeah.
Right. Or an animal that doesn't clearly serve any sort of like civilization level purpose. It's just scary.
Well, I'm sure they'd figure out how to make it serve us somehow.
After the first contact, right?
Right. Then they'll figure out like, oh, we can eat it. And then we all, I don't know, solved world hunger or something.
Or like me and Martha watched the Avatar, The Way of the Water, right?
How was that? I haven't.
Oh God. Oh God.
It was as bad and then worse than I thought it was going to be, which was pretty bad.
Like 3.5, I think it's 3.5 years long. I think it's like possibly 5 years long.
Oh, the actual runtime? Oh,
yeah.
Yeah, but then I'm pretty sure it's like you go in there and then you die, and like you live a whole life watching that movie, and then you die and you come back and you're like, thank God that was just a stupid movie.
I've had an experience.
Yeah. I mean, Sundance just wrapped, and I did the online version of Sundance, and they had all of these shorts. I'm obsessed with shorts. I love the shorts of Sundance. They're one of my favorite things. I mean, this year, my dear friend Erica Tremblay is Seneca Cayuga Nation from the Deer Clan, just like me and Martha, and she shot an entire feature film on our reservation. It was very fun to see like our tribal IDs on screen, and then like they filmed it in front of our like tribal council hall, and like, oh, it's just amazing to kind of see these places. Like, that's Grove, that's the river, we went to that gas station, and we went there. Like, that was really fun. And I got to make a VR piece, like a game in the world, so that was really fun. But I also love seeing the shorts, and there was this short called Claudio's song, and I am obsessed with this one. But it thinks a lot about the ways in which we remember through time people's lives, and they kind of talk about before the Gutenberg Bible and before printing press, people mostly had oral tradition, and before that there were even families that it was their job to keep through the family generation by generation the songs of history, right? And so they, it kind of goes into a little bit of a sci-fi universe that 8-minute, excuse me, that 8-minute short, it goes into this whole in 8 minutes it takes you from that kind of history to what could be in a possible future, but it all does it a lot through a song. So I've been thinking quite a bit about that, like what are these imprints that we leave in history. And so I don't know, I thought a lot about that when I watched Nope as well, because I often feel like the alien is also maybe a metaphor for encountering the future and encountering ourselves as the future. And I took that alien as the future human. Like, it was just like, oh yeah, that's a future human. Like that alien, even though it's violent and it's acting in this way, it's like, what if we evolved so far that we didn't even recognize ourselves, and that was our future kin? And we're like, oh my gosh, it's just eating our like horses and terrifying us, But what was that?
I said it just wanted to come home, and that was a horrible idea.
No, it's a really bad idea. Or travel back in time. It's like how we're all like, if you could travel to any time period, when would you want to travel? And he's like, oh my God, remember that planet Earth? Let's go there. And then he's like, no. I got stuck here. All they have to use horses. It's insane.
You just see the other aliens at the end, with the, like, at the other side of the portal with its tether, and it's just like, oh.
They're like, oh, don't tell mom we did this.
Right.
I liked how the anger of the being in Nope was so relatable as an animal. Like how, if a wild animal sees you, the way they like stomp around and roar at you or yell at you, and they're just kind of like, you watch out, don't bother me. But they're not, it's like a type of aggression, but it's more of like a hold, like I'm holding this space and go on. And I think we've all encountered like a mama deer. I encountered a mama deer the other day, and she was with her three young deers, and she just like stamps her foot at me like, all right, now we're here, you watch out. And obviously deer are like very fragile, and like, human could hurt them, but they do that thing of like, I'm aggressive, but I'm just letting you know, like, back off, we've got babies here. And you're like, it's okay, mother deer, I'm gonna walk on this other path and you're gonna be fine. But I liked that, recognizing that in that alien. I was very sad that it died, but I also understand that was part of it too.
I know, I was too. I was hoping it was like they would be friends. We would
Or at least
a horse and be riding it or something.
Oh my God.
I think it was definitely a novel take on the UFO thing. I think, I don't know. I maybe my expectations were a little too high, because I was just like, this had too many jobs to do. And yeah. So while that was interesting, like the most compelling part of the film for me was the flashback to I forget the character's name, but the monkey rampage.
Oh
my gosh, yeah.
It was the only part of the movie I cried. And I mean, like, I cried. That
was tough.
Yeah, that was
like the emotional core of the film. It's like, well, what's happening to this other, animal? Um, and yeah, I don't know. I don't know how to walk away from that. Still, I'm just kind of like, okay.
It's
I
just
was like,
showing like that's how these, like animals, including us, react to fear. Um, we can overreact to fear. I mean, we do it all the time. We don't have like claws and things. We have like guns, but we do it too. And if we look at, I don't know, I just thought that was interesting to show that, I don't know, how when we fear each other, we're going to like have this bigger response, just like an animal, of course.
I really liked how, I mean, I felt like the film, many of his films are about film, right? Or about the media representation. And of course, it starts with like Muybridge, and then it like starts right at the beginning of film. I feel like throughout the whole, um, all of Nope, or like learning about the history of how film is used, and especially that cinematographer that does documentary on animals, like that becomes a big part. Like, how do we capture nature and the wild to tame it and to own it and to capture it into this format? And oftentimes those people will live, for a year with the lions or whatever, to take these images or do these documentaries. So I thought a lot about that, the history of film. And I felt like that was the same with this short at Sundance called Claudio's Song, like that it was about like why we make art. We're imagining that this song will live forever in time. And yet I think in Claudio's Song, they were asking the question, like, what if it's just really random who gets to be remembered throughout time? What if it's like these people that we think are, I don't know, like in that case of Claudio's Song, it was about an Instagram influencer that they kind of set up to be sort of a pathetic person, right? Like he's not, that like he's not the greatest mind of our generation, but he is the one that the song gets remembered throughout all of time. And it's like, that is kind of maybe the remembrance that we also have could have been, what if all of these amazing luminaries were just like the Instagram influencers of their day, and everyone else in their day was like, oh no, man, no, but they're like so cringe. That one really, like that one's so cringe. Yeah, so I don't know. I liked the randomness of like, what if who we remember throughout time. I mean, I think a lot of us think about decolonization, and that yes, a lot of the people who are thought of the great minds of their generation came from a Western background and had, certain privileges. But what if what if even then they were also the random dumb ones too, like the random like cringe ones of that moment too. I don't know.
Yeah, they're the ones that couldn't find a job, so they just like sat at home and like wrote about stuff, and but their dad paid for them to get published,
Right. Nepo babies all the way down. What was one of the most shocking things, Eamon, about your quadrant? Eamon loves doing these quadrants, but
the most shocking thing?
Yeah. I mean, for me, the most shocking thing after you made this is that students would come to my class and be like, okay, so I have a question, professor, like, on the quadrant of like terrestrial Earth and disembodied, where do you think AI is? And I'm like, wait, that's not even a real thing. Eamon just
Eamon and Travis made that up when they were
just made that up.
Oh, it's going to be a thing now.
Yeah, definitely the most shocking thing about that is that students would ask me questions like in a very serious way about like, I mean, so for instance, in the movie Poltergeist, like and I'm like, this isn't real. I made it up. It's not a real thing. And even if I wasn't just some random asshole, if like a very, well-respected scholar, like some esteemed member of the academy had made it up, it would still be made up. Like, you know what I mean? Yeah. Somebody, all this shit is made up. So
students don't understand that everything is made up. And I have to say, if you're going to make like a graph and highlight things, I mean, I'm going to be like, yes, remember that must be on the test, and it's for sure a thing.
It's definitely screenshotted.
Well, because I guess they thought they might be quizzed on it or something.
Exactly. That's what I'm saying. That's right there.
If you can be quizzed on it, then it is real enough for them. I mean, as real as anything else. What
is reality?
This is your final right here. Can you fill out the quadrant thing accurately?
Accurately.
That's terrible. Well, yeah, I mean,
werewolves in the wrong spot again. God damn it.
I say Satan is excessively embodied, and I'm just going to say that right now. I disagree with it being earthly.
All right. Okay. Belongs further to the right, in your opinion.
Yeah, like I think the most excessively embodied, right? Because like Satan wants like all of the souls and wants to like embody and take over everyone to like do bad things or whatever.
And half of his danger is his carnality. I mean, we gotta like.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, this is the other thing too, is that I wasn't that surprised by this, but I was surprised to see how it worked out. All of these creatures or figures from pop culture, mythology, whatever, they don't have just one dimension to them. Like Satan has this dimension where, yeah, he is very, like, his carnality is a big part of it. He also has this dimension where he can kind of like seemingly teleport around or shapeshift or make these highly intellectual arguments to tempt you into sin,
or play the fiddle like really, really well. You know?
Play the fiddle really well. It's two different like dimensions to the same figure. So it's like you can isolate anyone at any point here, but that doesn't capture their entire sort of. So maybe this quadrant thing is sort of not useful. I don't know what it was supposed to have to begin with.
It's pretty useful.
It might not. Yeah, it helps you like isolate which dimensions of the character you want to talk about, but it doesn't really fully describe any of these things.
But I think it is helpful to show students how random these constructs can be and then have them take them seriously, because then I usually also try to get them to make them, right? Like now you make your quadrant, now you make your system diagram of what, I use the language of software architecture to have them build story worlds for their video games, because it will connect to software architecture very quickly. But then you do end up with these incredible diagrams of something that is as complex as any cybernetic makeup of a city electrical grid that is all about, a fan fiction of Harry Potter or something, right? Like they go hard and they figure it out. And then it does make sense, because when you're building a game, it gets to software eventually, right? But I try to teach them that these things are made up, because then they can make them up better. You also, or to like look at things like simulation theory and say, yeah, I mean, that was just a thought experiment. Like you could have a different thought about that.
Yeah, I mean, it's supposed to be a demonstration of structural logic, like help them think abstractly, help them think structurally, and demonstrate with some stuff that's pretty low stakes that they're already familiar with. Like how do you map out like a conceptual terrain, an abstract terrain with some degree of rigor, even if it's just about like, Brendan Fraser movies from the 90s or whatever.
Totally. Well, thanks for sharing your your grid with us.
Oh, yeah, thank you.
I think people like being able to visualize our understanding. Like we don't have a lot of embodied ways to look in 3D space to understand things. It's usually words or numbers and code, if it's like people like me and Martha, right? So having these, and coders love to make graphs. Like we love having graph outputs of things, because even if it's like we understand it in code, we love to like watch and look for some node based graphs about what we're doing, right? So yeah, I think that's really cool. Did you have any quotes you wanted to share with us, Madebo, from the book? I know you had collected a bunch of it, and I was reading a lot of them last night with Eamon.
Yeah, one that I was thinking about that's on Worlding that I just found is rather interesting. So let me try this. I don't want to share a screen. I don't want to share a thing on my screen. I want to share a thing from this window that looks like that. Are we seeing things?
Yep, 1 second. I think I got it. Oops. There we go. Oh, yep. It's there.
Awesome. So this first quote is, I think, to perhaps better answer the question of like what is worlding. At least I thought maybe that's not. No, it is. Okay. Yeah. So this first one is we owe aesthetics the substance of our days and the metaphysics that we adopt to dissect them. And since aesthetics expresses itself through worlding, it endows this activity with the status of the ultimate ancestor of all tools. Like an ancestor, the process of worlding demands to be acknowledged, and like a tool, it requires users to recognize its agency and to follow its inner rules. And so I thought that, and so for instance, if we take the example of the grid there, right, is that is externalizing a certain process of worlding that we undertake when we create our monsters for our narratives, or even just a taxology of pre-existing monsters. And I think like one thing that's pretty interesting about that is that it is this sort of like metaphysician's construct that allows you to like describe things that are a bit more distributed um, across those planes. And I think also this idea that like it is the it is there's something about the transgression about of boundaries, right? And that like you have this line of embodiment, and then I'm forgetting the other axis already, but that you have these boundaries that things move between, that sort of that excite different emotions in people. Um, but I think this is probably when you told me climate lounge, I was like, ooh, I've got a bit on that. And so that was this quote, which is of this civilization, little will remain but the scars that it has inflicted on the natural environment. Islands of plastic across the oceans, garbage dumps, nuclear spills, man made deserts will be the only rhapsodes left to sing the life and the metaphysics of billions of people and to testify for their legacy. And so I think that sort of like this sort of elegiac approach to worlding, to say like we are mourning this world and trying to imagine beyond it, is kind of the essential move of this book. And I think there's also the idea that there's also this idea of data loss, right? And the data loss between civilizations. And so like this idea that yes, Justin Bieber might wind up being might wind up being like the core of the next world, and like we mourn that too. But in the meantime, we're going to try to package things for these adolescent cultures to stumble upon as well. Um, and
I love that. I recently was a member of a jury on interactive at the International Documentary Film Amsterdam (IDFA), and one of the pieces that our jury selected to win was this piece, a VR piece called Plastisapiens, about how we are, obviously coexisting inside our bodies with microplastics and imagining a future where we become these plastisapiens, like we embrace our plasticity, and then it kind of collides with plastic gender, as a lot of the cyber feminists have defined it. And so kind of just imagine this future of hybrid plastic humans, which was like really terrifying and weird and wonderful. It was a really great virtual reality piece. But I think a lot about that, about we will have a layer in our stones that is plastic. We'll have a layer in DNA that will be commingled with plastic. All of our DNA is being changed because of plastic. It's like very fascinating. We talk about the Anthropocene, but I feel like there'll be like a Plastocene. Like, that is the Anthropocene, is our plastic that we have created. But plastic is made of largely petrochemicals, and fungi can actually digest it and change it into its atomic structures again. And so, I don't know, the world belongs to the plastic and the fungi, I guess.
that's so, yeah, I think that's probably another, I forget where I got this exercise, but like the, I think one way to break yourself out of like, to break yourself out of the Anthropocene is like to imagine like a big room, a relatively large room, maybe ballroom, and just like each person that walks in is a different generation of your family notionally, and then ask yourself like how many people walk in before you hit a quadruped, right?
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
and then if you play the game forward, like how many people walk in that are recognizably human.
Yeah.
Um, and then I think, like, for me, the adolescent culture that I most often am imagining is Earth in 2100, at least as accurately as we've been able to project, which we'll find out in 80-ish years. Is the total population is estimated to be around 11 million. 4.7 billion of those people are going to be Asian, of some description. And 4.3 billion of those people are going to be African of some description. And then there's, like, maybe like 1.3 billion people left. But, like, to that adolescent culture, if we've already, like, I mean, one, I think there's this weird there's this weirdly mournful utopia about it, which is like, well, if they're an adolescent culture, what does that mean? That means this culture has collapsed. Perhaps they're not dealing with white supremacy. Perhaps. We'll see.
Yeah.
That doesn't survive the collapse, right? But, like, what? But that is, that's a world, right? And if we think about, like, what we know of climate change, okay, well, who's going to be dealing with that at that time? What are the decisions that we're making today that are going to fall on them? And I think that's sort of part of why this book's framing was so useful to me. And then I also think that there is a there's a dead spiritual core of, I think, I'll say this for the future's producing world, right? That, one, there's an incredible imbalance. So, for instance, I've worked for a few years as a corporate futurist, and, like, the amount of energy and just brain hours that are going into producing, like, this, frankly, fiction, right? That all of these enterprises will continue, that all of the technological all the technological progress we do will be captured for economic surplus, that all of the innovations we will bring will be accepted, right? We will find whatever shape we can accept them in order, to make them as palatably exploitable as possible. And that this, and then, the larger fiction, beyond that, is that this is the best sort of world we could live in. This is the best sort of world we can give you to imagine. And so I think there's an enormous amount of work that's already been poured into those futures, right? And, for people like me that want to eat, the likelihood that your next future is going to be in service to that is incredibly high. But so, like, one, how do we really open up a world of public access, public interest futures? How do we sort of offset, for people in the priest class of the future, like me? How do we offset that footprint that we've sort of generated by selling, our imagination, our imagining hours, right, to these corporations? And then how do we, like, what is required, in the field of foresight, which, used to be more comfortable being called futurism? Like, I would say the entire theoretical history of this field is squirreling away from the term prophecy. Just finding new ways to be like, no, we're not these crazy woo-woo people. We deserve to be taken seriously. So refer to us as strategists, refer to us as anything but this term prophecy. And I think there's a number of reasons for that. One, just the allergy to religion we've developed. I think, two, there's like I said, there's this really shriveled moral heart of certainly American life, but, like, of our civilization, right? And what we've been willing to accept at different times. And I think that, one, naming the practice prophecy, naming the sort of aims of the practice a prophetic culture, right, is like, there is a certain weight to that still, right? All of the architecture of belief, right, that goes into our marketing products, that goes into that goes into all of these things, right? Like they have like deeply religious legacies, and those have more robust muscles for the moral angle of it, right? For how we deal with death, for how we consider ourselves as a finite species, right? That secular, secular culture has none of that, right? And I think when most of when the oculus narrows to all the different opportunities we have to unalive ourselves and our civilization, like to be in a cultural setting in which that's not mentionable, right? In which the what did this all mean is not something we can actually like wrestle with, because we need to stick to the pragmatics, for whatever reason. I think is a real impoverishment of the whole point of futurity, the whole point of being able to consider alternatives, right, to the way that we live. And so I think this way of collapsing the ancient and the machine, of collapsing sort of modernism and postmodernism, whatever we've decided we're on now, but like this real, I think, responsibility, right, of people of our generation to lay our civilization to rest, right, and then also, right, the real responsibility that I'm feeling, as somebody who's considering becoming a parent and things like that, to offer, something to future generations. I think, ever since my entire economic life as a person has been happening in some stage of crisis, and then, when I talk to a friend from Mexico and they're like, man, inflation, like we've had that for generations, like we're good. But, to be able to break out of that, right, and speak at the civilizational scale, and to do so, I think to do so in a spirit of hope, right, in a spirit of service, in a spirit of um, in a spirit of I don't want to call it like a benevolent mysticism, but like to give to our imaginative capacities at least the same benefit of doubt that we give to our religion of statistics today, right? Like that we
That's an
give to.
exceptional point, that we really believe so much in numbers in a way that they're most of them, only a hair away from Eamon's quadrant, in the sense of the way that someone decided to compare two things together and then write a statistical analysis of it, and the way that we do ascribe to that so much belief and power. And those of us who are statisticians and data engineers and data scientists were like, you can make that look like that in a lot of different ways. Like, I want to
Yeah.
show me the code. Or really, that's an interesting word phrase that you used, and used some statistics in it. I was listening to Radiolab the other day, and they were talking about people's optimism. The entire episode was about optimism, but they alluded to this study that was done in the 80s, where they went and up to New Jersey and just interviewed people on the street, and they interviewed only about 500 people, and they said, how likely is it that in your lifetime that war will end, that we just won't have any more war, or maybe not even just in your lifetime, just in general. Do you think it is likely that humans will stop going to war? And it was about 85% positive. Like, people were like, yeah, I think we'll end war, like. And then they did the same kind of study, but with 5,000 people in New Jersey, and went on the street and interviewed people in, I believe this was, episode was maybe in 2019. Or maybe no, I think it might have been during COVID. So they were like, okay, we had to kind of ask people, and we realized that that point in time, maybe people were a little more stressed. But they said, how likely is it, do you think, that humanity would cease to go to war? And it was completely flipped. In only 20 years, people went from thinking that war is inevitably on its way out. We won't have another one, maybe in their lifetime we won't have another one, to people's responses and qualitative responses of saying, like, that's ridiculous, it's innate, it's natural, it's what humans have been evolved to do. And that was so different than in the 80s when people were like, yeah, I think humans have like evolved past that and we're no longer see that as a way forward. And so I do, it is interesting that in this moment in our generation we talk so much about the end, right? This is the end. Many people obviously don't want to have children because they're worried about climate change, or we see all these studies and statistics again around how unhopeful people are about the future. But it does feel to me somewhat recent, right? It doesn't feel to me like it's taken hundreds of years for us to get here, but more like just a pandemic, maybe. I don't know. I don't know if that's, I don't know what you think about that.
Yeah, it's recent and it's so manufactured. And it's
I
not to
think
say
I
that
feel
like, and so it's recent and it's manufactured, which means that we have that conversation on surface level, right? What if there's actually nothing we can do? The answer is despair and buy some more shit, right? And
yeah.
like, shock, retail therapy. And like, and to my mind, like a utopia today, an ethical utopia, I should say, is not we've solved all of the problems, but rather that we're staring at we as a civilization have decided to stare at the answers, or to stare at the solution space and really propose something. And if in fact, right, if we want to credit that, if we want to credit that perspective that there's literally nothing we can do, then at least we can put this thing to bed, right? At
Yeah.
least,
Yeah, at least if and it's kind of maybe saying, do you really mean that? Like, if you really mean that, how would you wanna live then your life?
right.
Or are we just catastrophizing? Would you rather be catastrophizing, or if you've taken it at face value and say, "Okay, yes, this is the end," then how do you want to live? Wouldn't you wanna put it to bed?
The
Don't you
end of
sunset this
days.
and
And I
say,
think
"Okay."
that
Yeah.
that capacity is completely lacking in certainly American culture. And so to me, it's like there's so sorry, this next Campagna quote is like we have to help future generations deal with the fact that this human thing is potentially over, right? But like as fragile as it is, as you know, as as specious a notion as it is, right? Like if are we serious about being animals, right? Are we serious about, are we serious about like continuing to find the energy that it takes um to keep a human alive? And like are are we okay with that energy cost exploding, and are we okay with the effects that that has, right, on humans? Um and so this quote in particular, I think this idea that like um indeed, there exists no other ruin, but what survives is as a part of a subject's daily struggle to create a world where life might flourish, to create a world where life might flourish. Whatever fails this task, however large and profound its marks might be on the environment, cannot be considered the ruin of a lost world, but is merely an excremental race. Um, I just love that phrase. It's like, well, what is, one, like if we are the progeny of some celestial beings, it's just as likely that we are their excrement as their as their offspring.
Yeah.
But like, what does that what does that require of us? What does it mean to be the remains, and what do we actually build out of that? And so I think for me, it's a space, it's a more hopeful space than is offered than that is typically offered, I think, in either direction, right? Because I think the ways in which we talk about, for instance, climate change, the ways in which we talk about sustainable development goals are kind of asinine. Like we really like these these goals are structured to continue a high energy way of life, right? And therefore like to keep on killing ourselves as slowly as possible, right? Until it's undeniable, right? At which point certainly the behaviors, right, of certain people will change. Like we've heard very loudly about the exit plans, right,
Right.
of
Right.
various tech overlords. And so I think what I hope to do is to provide that sort of exit vehicle, right, that escape pod for people from the the strictures of needing to continue producing this world. Um, and again, no solutions, but a place to ask questions. Like I don't I don't like the ways in which I don't like the ways in which it feels quite often that our political imagination is captured, or that people with, you know, credentials, right, can sort of can sort of fall into the habit of the expert, you know, the expert trap of just like, yes, this is the best that we know that we can do, and we're going to continue trying to produce that knowledge in this way, even though, you know, it has certain failings. And so I think opening space up for people to imagine different solution spaces, to imagine different you know, different, I think different burial practices, I guess, you know, for this civilization, while they're still living in it, and then also to imagine the lives of, to imagine the, you know, the potentially very difficult lives, right, of the new humans we're spawning, as opposed to just like this denialism of like, oh no, things will get right back on track. No, the technical solutions are going to work. It's like, well, how do you actually raise um, post-apocalyptic children, in a way, um, and how do you raise them? How do you raise them with the skill, right, to create a new society? And if that is, for me, that's a more, yeah, a more centered and more sane space than where I've been the past few years. And so, all early days, I, you know, I just tried, I just tried this talk out as a guest lecture for the first time last week. So,
Awesome.
um, yeah, I'm still working through the book and processing a lot, but yeah, it's been great to come on here and talk with y'all.
Thank you so much for being here. We really appreciate it. I really enjoyed working with you on all your Futurist Writers Room initiatives, and thank you for sharing your thoughts um part of your lecture with us today. Come back to Climate Lounge anytime. Uh,
Anytime. Yeah.
Yahweh for
Thank
joining.
you for
Thank you so
having me.
much. All right. Bye.
All right, bye.